6-year-old brought gun from home in Newport-News school shooting, police say. The wounded teacher went to the school office and said call 911 before collapsing, a witness said. Abigail Zwerner was in the middle of a routine lesson at Richneck Elementary School last week when, the police said, a boy in her class, just 6 years old, pulled out a handgun at his desk, pointed it at his teacher and fired. At a news conference on Monday, officials said it was not an accident and appeared to be an intentional shooting. The boy brought the gun from home, the authorities said, before aiming it at his teacher. When the shot was fired, Ms. Zwerner threw up her hand, but the bullet passed through it and struck her chest. Though badly wounded, she sent the students in her class, as many as 20 children, scrambling into the hallway, while another employee rushed into the room and restrained the 6-year-old, the authorities said. Only then did Ms. Zwerner, 25, stagger into the hallway and toward the office to find help. But first, the police said, she paused and looked back. She turned around to make sure that every one of those students was safe, said Steve Drew, the chief of police in Newport News, Virginia, who described Ms. Zwerner's actions as heroic and said she was in stable condition. I believe she did save lives, because I don't know what else might have happened. Even as school shootings become more common, it is exceptionally rare for a child so young to be accused, and the case has raised a host of complex questions. Virginia law prohibits leaving a loaded gun where it is accessible to children under 14, a crime that is punishable as a misdemeanor. But unlike some other states, such as Oregon and Massachusetts, there is not a broad law that requires all guns to be safely stored in homes. The authorities offered on Monday the first account of how the child obtained the gun, saying that the weapon, a 9mm Taurus handgun, came from his home and that it had been legally purchased by his mother. The child had obtained that firearm, placed it in his backpack and brought it to school, Chief Drew said, citing interviews with the child and his mother. Chief Drew said that any potential charges would be based on what the facts are and what the law supports. The child is receiving treatment at a medical facility, the authorities said. His family has not been identified. The unusual shooting has reverberated around the country, stirring familiar fears in an era of repeated school shootings, while raising new, complicated questions about how to ensure safety when even the youngest children can bring a gun to school. We've addressed metal detection, random searching and all kinds of other things at the secondary level, said George Parker III, the superintendent of Newport News Public Schools. I'll be honest, who would be prepared for a 6-year-old to bring a loaded weapon to school and shoot their teacher? The focus in elementary schools had been on preventing adult active shooters from entering classrooms, Mr. Parker said. But now, he said, some steps taken at high schools, like metal detectors, may need to be explored. I hate to be at this point where I'm considering this, but we have to start relying on those types of deterrents at the elementary level as well, said Mr. Parker, who seemed distressed to even be thinking about such measures. My board members know how I feel about making our schools look anything like a prison, he added. I want our schools to be great places to educate children. But, he said, if we can't maintain safety, or at least get to the point where we can have an effective and safe school day, kids won't learn anyway. Many districts have tried to increase security in recent years, but efforts are typically concentrated in older grades, federal data shows. Nearly 15% of high schools had random metal detector checks, compared with less than 2% of elementary schools in the 2019 to 2020 school year, the most recent year for which data was available, according to the National Center of Education Statistics. About 7 to 9% of middle and high schools required backpacks to be clear or banned them, compared with about 2% of elementary schools. More than 80% of high schools reported employing at least one security staff member, compared with about 55% of elementary schools. But experts caution that the hardening of schools is not reliably effective at preventing gun violence and can affect students' perception of their safety. The research consistently indicates that none of the school hardening procedures, including metal detectors, prevent school shootings, Elizabeth Anthony, an associate professor at Arizona State University who studies school safety and child trauma, said in an email. She noted that metal detectors have been found to reduce the amount of contraband, but not directly prevent gun violence. The hardening of schools also comes with considerable risks, she added, including to Black and Hispanic children who are already surveilled more frequently than their white peers. Metal detectors and clear backpacks are more common in schools where a large majority of students are children of color, according to federal data. Richneck Elementary serves more than 550 students, more than half of them are Black and Hispanic, and about a quarter are white. It listed a security officer on its website. Several experts pointed to counseling and mental health support as a better investment for schools, and said officials must also look outside of schools to prevent violence. Jagdish Kubchandani, a professor of public health at New Mexico State University who has studied school violence, pointed to research that found that children under 10 were as likely as older children to know where guns were stored in the home. Another study found that 70% of 5 to 6-year-olds and 90% of 7 to 8-year-olds had enough finger strength to pull the trigger. The children know where the guns are and how they are stored, he said. There were still many unknowns in the Virginia case, including how exactly the gun had gotten into the hands of the child, or how it had been stored. Dan Semenza, the director of interpersonal violence research at the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center at Rutgers University, said that the safest way to prevent children from using guns is to not have a firearm in the home of a child. Still, he said, there were ways to limit access even with guns in the home. You are talking about a gun locker or a gun safe, where the firearm is separate from the ammunition, he said. Even more safe would be having some kind of lock that is biometric, he added, so that only a particular individual could access it, similar to using face or finger technology to log into a cell phone.